Good evening, everyone. And My name is Sohini, and I work as publisher for children at Penguin Random House, India. It's such a pleasure to be on this platform today, virtually meeting all of you who've joined in. And on behalf of Crossword and Penguin Random House India, I welcome you all to this session. Book filled conversations are always such a joy, and particularly so when you get to be in conversation with your most admired, most favorite author. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by the legend, the one and only Ruskin Bond. Good evening, Mr. Bond, and
Good
welcome to
evening,
the show.
Bernie. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone at Crossword, readers, friends. Nice to be with you.
So here we are with an author we all love and admire. He's somebody who has given us a phenomenal range of books and stories, books that we've all grown up reading and loving. And my own association with Mr. Bond actually goes back to a long, long time ago. I was, of course, introduced to his books in school as a child, as a student. But little did I know that one day I would actually get to work on his books. So I really have this rare blessing and privilege to have known him and to have worked on his children's books in the last 15 years, books that have come out under the puffin imprint of Penguin Random House India. And I think I've really cherished our association. So many books have come out, we've created together. And what I would like to really talk about today, and to begin with, is the fact that we've continued this association for so many years through real letters. I mean, handwritten letters that we keep writing to each other. I mean, book suggestions to contract details to editor editorial related things are all shared through that. And so, Mr. Bond, I really really treasure those. And it's so wonderful to be in conversation with you today. And we worked on many books together, and the latest being this new book that's just come out. It released a few weeks ago on your 87th birthday, called All Time Favorites for Children. So, this is a book that features a handpicked selection of stories by you in a gorgeous full color edition. So, it's really, features these beautiful artworks. So, would you like to tell our readers a little about this collection and how it's different from all your other works?
Well, thank you. Well, we selected 25 stories um,
Yeah,
out of the 4 or 5,000 that I've done over the last 70 years. So it would be wonderful to have a very big book, of mine with about 4,000
everything in
stories,
it.
but you'd have difficulty carrying it about. And we wanted this also to have colorful pictures too. Because as
Right.
Alice said in Alice in Wonderland, what good is a book without pictures and
So true.
conversation? Well, there are plenty of conversations in my stories, but I can't, I'm afraid, as my artistic work is not very good, to say the least. And at school, when I had to draw an apple, it looked like a football. Um, Wishful thinking because I preferred footballs. But anyway, so here is all-time favorites with 25 stories, very beautifully presented in color, and some are stories that I selected, some are stories that Sohini selected, and I added 3 or 4 that I wrote especially for the collection. So it's a nice mix, and I hope you'll enjoy them. Um, and it's nice to have them out this year on my 87th birthday, or that was when the book was ready, and during this awful pandemic that has kept us all tied up at home. Hmm, and if it gives you all pleasure and helps you to pass the time, I would have done something worthwhile, I feel. And I'm
It's so
always
true.
writing. I don't stop writing. This is one writer who doesn't retire. So I've been doing it 70 years, and I hope I can do it a little longer. So over
I
to you.
mean,
So
so true, Mr. Bond. And I think the title is really apt, all-time favorites. It does have so many timeless stories that are bound to be, favorites with readers. Your favorites are on it, and so are mine. And there's something for every reader. There are stories of mountains and nature and tales of birds and beasts and, funny stories about misadventures and encounters with, eccentric relatives, and also so many heartwarming stories of friendship and compassion in typical Ruskin Bond style. And that's what makes it so special. So, since we are on the subject of favorites, what are your favorites from this collection? And why just stories? I mean, it could even be characters, and so many endearing characters inhabit the pages of these stories, from Rusty to Ranji to Uncle Ken. There's Romy, there's Koki, and there are all these animals and pets, Timothy the tiger and Toto the monkey. Who are your favorites?
Yes, well, characters are all important, and especially in stories written for children, because it's the characters are the ones that you remember later on, and sometimes you want to read more stories about a particular character. And so Uncle Ken is one of my own favorites. Um, of course, the children, Ranji and Koki, keep turning up in my stories. So do grandparents and aunts and uncles. Usually, aunts and uncles who are far away, so that they can't get at me when I write funny things about them. And Uncle Ken was a real uncle, and but as time went on and the stories became popular, I had to invent incidents and episodes and exploits for him. Um,
And dedicate an entire book to him, Crazy Times with Uncle
yes,
Ken.
every time
He
for Uncle Ken.
deserves a book,
Buffin wrote
right?
it a few years back. So there are a
That's
lot of
right.
Uncle Ken stories, stories about, and in other collections, stories about grandfather and the pets he kept. And then, of course, the children who keep turning up in some of my stories, their adventures, Ranji with his cricket bat, or, or Koki with her grandmother. And you've got, I think, a fair representation in this collection. Um,
True, and my favorite, if I could just add, um, there's a story called Miss Kellner and the Magic Biscuit Tin, and
yes,
I found it a really endearing story. I mean, don't we all wish we had somebody like Miss Kellner in our lives, forever indulging us with goodies the way she did? Whenever
yes,
you would visit her, she was nearly 60, and you were still a child, and you would visit her house, and there she was. She would, put out this biscuit tin in front of you, and you could take your pick, and essentially, it was almost like a lucky dip of sorts. So was she, you write about her with a lot of fondness, and the story seems to be
yes,
like a tribute to those good old times and
yes,
to her memory of somebody who kept you company. Was she inspired
yes.
by real life? I mean, was she a real life character?
She played a very important part in my own childhood. She was actually a tenant of my grandmother's, and she lived in half the house. And my grandmother was really quite strict, and little boys should talk only when they're spoken to, and no second helpings unless you're being a good boy today, and things like that. So I
Yeah,
would, when I was hungry, I would slip across to Miss Kellner's. She was a crippled lady. She couldn't walk. She was always in a chair and
an
would be
armchair.
carried about by her servants. And but she was always, and she would sit out in the garden most of the morning. And she was always happy to see me. I would go and talk to her. I've always, even as a child, I found old people interesting because they had stories to tell. And Miss Kellner would even teach me card games and
Yeah, you
always
read about that.
beat me at them. They were simple games, but I was never any good at cards. And then she would tell me some stories about her childhood and then even how she got crippled. It was in an accident in Kolkata when she was a girl. And then she had this wonderful biscuit tin. And there were all different kinds of biscuits in it. So, as you say, it was a lucky dip. She said, well, you can have one. And
Yeah.
I would take whatever came out, a ginger biscuit or a water biscuit or a cream cracker. I didn't know what to expect. So, and of course, she didn't limit me to one. She
So
also
it's
had
lovely.
in her kitchen meringues and marzipans and things like
Yeah,
that.
lemon tarts and so on. You
Right.
write so fondly of her, and what I really find remarkable and
Yes.
fascinating is
Not
just
many
the
people
way.
visited
And
her. See? She
yeah,
didn't obviously, being a cripple, didn't couldn't go out to parties, and she didn't give parties. But so I think she liked my company, and
and it comes across in the story. Yes,
yes,
so
and
true.
so that was every winter when I came home for my holidays, I would see her until I went off to England after finishing school. And while I was away, she passed away. So when I came back to India, she wasn't there anymore. But I fondly remember her, uh, and of course the biscuit tin. Small
Absolutely,
boy,
absolutely.
don't forget, don't forget.
It's really wonderful, the way you remember these episodes and people from your life. And of
I
course, I
have
mean, you are blessed with an immaculate memory. But more than that, I think just this great habit of yours of putting things down on paper and maintaining a journal and writing down notes and observations and musings. Do you still do that? Do you still have a journal?
yes, yes, I still have a journal, and in fact, um, I was writing something just about half an hour ago. What was I writing about?
Amazing.
No, good luck and bad luck. I said, good luck
How
comes
interesting.
sometimes, and you've got to grab it, and because it's going to run away very quickly. Whereas bad luck, when it comes, it doesn't want to leave the home or the house. It lingers on, hangs around, and you've got to be very firm and give it a kick and throw it out of the window so that good luck comes back again. So I'm writing a little piece about good luck and
And I'm
bad luck.
certain it will make it to another story or an upcoming
Well,
book. I assume, and I think that's what is really so good, because for the last 70 years you've continued to write, and I do think somewhere this journal possibly has a role to play. It is the origin of so many of your wonderful stories, and and a reason why you've never really run out of ideas on what to write. I think
yes,
for our viewers today as well, there's such a lovely takeaway that maintain a journal and write down something, anything, and you never know what's going to come of it. So,
exactly,
Mr.
exactly.
Bond, what do you think are the ingredients of a good story, especially for children?
Well, of course, it has to be a good story because you have to get the attention of the reader straight away on page one. An adult might put up with you for a couple of chapters, but if you haven't caught his or her attention, that's with a kid, you have to get their attention straight away. Um, and you have to have, as we were saying, interesting characters. Characters are very important. So so that either the reader can either identify with a boy or a girl who's the focal point of the story, or with eccentric characters or odd characters or those who stand out, in some way, So if you look at all the children's classics um, over a couple of hundred years, you'll find that the ones that stay in your mind or you go back to, there's always it's the characters that keep the book alive. It,
Absolutely, absolutely.
in Alice in Wonderland, it's the Mad Hatter and the Mad Tea Party, um, and then in Treasure Island, it's Long John Silver, the pirate chief, or in and so you Pickwick Papers, it's Mr. Pickwick, a chubby eccentric gentleman. So there's always one or two characters who stand out, who are different, from the ordinary run of the mill. So characters
Absolutely.
are therefore vital, I think.
And yeah, your characters are absolutely timeless. If I may just add to that, what I also find really fascinating whenever I read or reread your books is just the way you also tend to get people's emotions and feelings, particularly of young people's feelings, so right, and you just seem to get it. I mean, if I talk about this story, I mean, it's one of my favorites, when you can't climb trees anymore. So
Mm.
there is this, almost middle-aged Ruskin who goes back to his grandmother's house, and The house is, of course, sold off, and there are new owners, and there's this colonel and his wife and daughter, and you meet this little girl when you visit that house, and she takes you inside, and you notice that familiar jackfruit tree. You sit down on a bench and you reflect on the past, and you tell her about all the little treasures that you collected, marbles and pebbles and grandfathers medals and little knickknacks like young boys keep. And you said that you put it in the hollow of the tree, and this girl says, "Oh, we might just find something." And here she is climbing on the tree. I don't know if one can see. So she's climbing the tree, and you're sitting there, and she actually finds an iron cross belonging to your grandfather, and she says, "Oh, this is what you came looking for." And in response, you say, "No, it wasn't the cross I came for. It was my lost youth." She understood this, even though her own youth still lay ahead of her. She understood it, not as an adult, but with the wisdom of the child that was still part of her. I mean, such simple yet powerful lines. So, how do you I mean, this book has been written, the story has been written so long ago, and it's from another time
Yes,
altogether, but yet
yes,
every word strikes a chord. How do you
I
do
wrote.
it?
I'm glad you chose this story. I wrote this, yes, in the story I'm middle aged, and I wrote it when I was middle aged, when I was about 40 or 45. Um, well, I was, you see, I always good at writing about childhood, and in the beginning, a lot about my own childhood, and so that later on, when I started writing for children, um, I found, it came easily to me because whereas I'd begun writing about children, I was now writing for children. So the two, in a way, coalesced and came together. And I have vivid memories of my own childhood first in Jamnagar and Dehradun, Delhi with my father, etc. And I like going back to that period because I find I can bring it to life. It's so vivid in my mind and my memory, and that's why I write so much out of my own life because I like to, in a way, bring it back to life again, and revive it, and
And
make those people live again in a way, through my words and writing, and so to some extent, I think I succeed, and it gives me pleasure and joy to do that. Uh,
to a great extent, I mean, every word strikes a chord, and it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. And I often wonder, Mr. Bond, do you get any sort of advice from young readers? Like so many, I know young fans reach out to you, they write letters to you. Um, do
but
they write anything funny, or anything memorable that you may want to share? Have you ever taken any advice or suggestions from them in terms of what your next book could be, or just about anything?
Yes, I get letters too from readers, even handwritten letters, because they know I like writing by hand. Unfortunately, I can't reply to all of them because I'd be doing nothing else. But it's always nice to hear from young readers, and they often ask questions: "Is this a true story, or is it pure fiction?" Hmm, and they want to know, was Uncle Ken real, or did grandfather really keep all those animals? So, um, and some stories are a mix of fact and fiction because I might start off with something that actually happened, and then it will run away by itself, the story. Um, so, so there it is. And what was it?
I mean, at this point, I think we can take a question. We are getting a few questions, Mr. Bond, if I may, and
Yeah, certainly.
if you're
I can
okay
see
with it. Yeah.
something
So there
on the
is.
screen, but
Uh, I
my eyes are not good enough to read it at this distance. So you read out the question, and I'm wearing reading glasses, and the other glasses I've got are distance glasses. So the screen is sort of not far enough and not near enough, as maybe a character in Alice would say. But where are you, Sid? Everyone's disappeared along with Alice.
They probably had a time thing.
Yeah.
No, it is still live. Please put your questions in the
Okay.
comment section below.
The faces, Sohini disappeared, and
They might
Now, Mr.
come
Bond,
soon.
I'm sorry, there was a technical glitch. I'm back now, and I'm all set to take our question.
yes, and
Can
even
we
when
have...
yes,
So somebody was asking you, what's the inspiration of your horror stories?
oh, horror stories. Oh, dreams. Sometimes they're based on nightmares or dreams I've had. And I keep a little book of dreams, separate from my usual notebook or journal. There's a dream book. And if I have a very interesting dream, I note it down. And it can become a story one day. Usually these spooky horror stories, because I don't really meet ghosts very often. Um, Occasionally, you see, ghosts are probably everywhere. It's they're watching us, but we don't see them. Uh,
They're possibly scared of us. No,
yes,
totally, totally.
they're scared of us.
No, sure. And in fact, there is another question from Vipra Madan. She asks, Sir, what has been the most challenging phase of your life as a writer and how you overcame it?
The most challenging phase of my life as a writer. Yes, well, you see, I worked very hard on my first novel, and I wrote two or three drafts before it could get published in England. And then I came back to India, and then for 2 or 3 years, I had a great difficulty in writing another novel. I was writing short stories, but you see, I was only 18, 19, and I'd written myself out in that first novel, The Room on the Roof, because it was autobiographical. And I, now there was nothing new to write about, and I wasn't at that stage inventive enough to create something that was purely fiction. So it took some time before I could do a longer work. But since I'm a compulsive writer, I turned out stories and articles and poems and bombarded all the magazines and newspapers in the land, and made a living from it too. Uh, and then I wrote a sequel, Vagrants in the Valley, and then there were longer works, novellas. But I've always preferred the short story as a medium, as a genre, and still do. And now, as I get older, I'm writing more in the line of memoirs, and sort of because, after all, there's so much to look back upon, and
So
why
true.
not? So, well,
Absolutely.
every book is a challenge in a way. Every story that one writes uh, is a challenge of sorts, and you know when you finished it whether it's any good or not. So there are stories over the years that I wasn't satisfied with, and probably they ended up in the waste paper basket. So nothing is sacred when it comes to writing. But in those 70 years of writing, so of course there have been challenges. At times the bank balance fell very low too. So then I would write letters to Penguin Books and Puffin. When are my royalties due? Things.
But this is a question I often think about. What was the publishing scenario like, in the early 90s? And I mean, you started writing for children much later in life. You were nearly 40 when it happened. I mean, you were never a writer for children. You never thought you would
Yes.
begin to write only for children, but it happened accidentally. And would you like to share that story and that little journey and the publishing scenario at that time?
Well, in the 1950s and 60s, there were we had publishers, but they were all usually school book publishers. Um, there weren't any publishers doing general fiction or, literature.
Right,
Um,
trade books and
yes, not until the 1980s, when Penguin came into India, and then HarperCollins and other publishers. And we had our own, a few of our own too. like Rupa, but they were originally distributors. We then
That's
went
right.
into publishing. So most of our own publishers were sort of specialized publishers. But so it was only in the 80s that there was this now sudden surge of books by Indian writers being published in India. Before that, you had to really go look for a publisher abroad, and that wasn't easy. You generally had to have an agent. You know, fortunately, in India, we are not dependent on agents yet. We can deal directly with a publisher, um, which I prefer because it's good to have a good relationship with the publisher and not have an intermediary. So
So
there it
true.
is. That's one reason why I have so many short stories. Is that in those years after the Roman Roof, when I was back in India for 10, 15 years, I was making a living by writing for magazines and newspapers. So the work had to be short, whether
Yeah.
it was fiction or non-fiction. But the one good thing was that it all accumulated, and later all those stories went into collections and anthologies and into
Yeah,
you
collections such as these.
so some of them are here.
And so
For instance,
absolutely, a phenomenal
yeah,
journey. And at this stage, I'm going to take a question. So Piyali Kundu says, Sir, have you written any book that you don't like that much yourself? Not so favorites.
maybe the one or two which I feel could have been better, or um, not the. I think the children's books. I've been happy with most of them. Uh, Maybe there are a couple of adult books which perhaps could have been done differently or better. Um, but as far as my writing for young people goes, I don't think that there's anything that I would want to do away with. No. Um, I,
And I'm sure children feel the same. I think they're absolutely,
yes,
great
well,
stories.
and of course, over the years, the writing has changed. Ever since I came to live in the hills, more of my stories and work has become sort of nature oriented, and
True.
birds, trees, animals, forests and mountains have come into them more than they used to when I was, say, writing from Dehradun or London or Delhi.
So true, Mr. Bond. In fact, I remember this story that you've written called in this collection called "Friends from the Forest," and you write about this 11-year old Romy, who is sick and he sits by the window. He goes to a hillside
Yeah,
cottage because he has to rest and recuperate, and he makes friends with all the creatures that come visiting, and there are squirrels and eagles, and there's this little butterfly coming about, and praying mantis, and so on. And he starts painting, and he really takes refuge in art. And
yeah,
and even when he recovers and he goes back to his city life, this is something that he's kind of had a love for the art and for painting and for drawing,
yeah.
something that is going to stay with him for the rest of his life. And I really wanted to read out this section that I particularly loved. And you say, and he continued to draw pictures of the birds and animals and insects. At school, he won prizes for some of his artwork, and when he grew up, he became famous as a painter of wildlife. It had all begun in that forest in the hills, at the big picture window that opened out on the oaks and pines and plum trees and the friendly little creatures that dwelt there. Sometimes great achievements have small beginnings. Such beautiful lines, and I think it's so true for all of us, so true for you too. I mean, when you discovered the little bookshelf so many
Yeah.
years ago in the forest rest house, or
Yeah.
the little
That's
library that your father
the
created in
Kellner.
Jamnagar, that was the start of your love for words, love for books. And I think each of your stories in this collection also ends with something that's going to stay with the reader. So at this point, I'm going to take another question. And so Aditya Karambelkar asks you, when will you be writing the detective story you promised us in lockdown?
Yeah, yeah. This was written during lockdown. Friends from the Forest. The little story about the little boy who becomes an artist.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yes, I was tired of writing about little the boy who became a writer, which was me. So I had for a change of a boy who becomes an artist and how nature can.
Nature plays such an important role. In fact, I have a related question, Mr. Bond. I mean, nature and the mountains have been such an integral part of your life and works, and they have impacted your career and writing in such a big way, right? Now, today, I mean, how do you think we can inculcate that love for nature in today's kids and today's youngsters, and small steps, make a difference? How do you think we can do it? Any advice from you?
Oh, I think yeah, um, do whatever you can to keep your surroundings beautiful. Because I know, after all, most of you are living in cities or towns, and you might have to um, travel a considerable distance to be in the mountains or in a forested areas. So you would get, no doubt, depending on where you stay, you'd try to have a nice garden if you have space, grow things in your rooms if a sunny balcony, as I do, because even I don't have garden space, but I've managed to grow everything from geraniums to tomatoes
You
and
have a green thumb. I've seen
yeah,
that.
grow things
Yeah,
as
yeah.
much as you can. Look, and if birds come, have a bird bath or some a place where they can. I've got pigeons roosting in the roof, and so um, be sort of environmental friendly as much as you can. And it's difficult, I know,
Much
when you're
needed.
in Bombay or
Totally.
Calcutta or Delhi.
I think
Um,
small steps make a difference.
and when you get a chance, then do go out into the hills and the mountains, or
In the
take your
national
holiday
parks. And
where you can be close to nature. Um,
true, true. I'm going to take another question, sir, since we have very little time left now. So, Hema Sethi Taneja asks you, I had a question about your inspiration for firm and real life characters, which are fictional but appear real.
yes, well,
What
you
is
see, mm, although they don't admit it, I think most writers do base their characters on people they have met or known. Um, just as I said, Dickens's Mr. Micawber is based on his own father. Um, but of course, writers don't always admit it. But so I've drawn freely from people I've known. And even when I've invented a character, very often there will be characteristics from different people come in. It's really that perhaps it's very rare that you would invent a character who's totally fictitious, unless it's an alien or some monster uh, or creature from the deep or something. So, but people are usually
all around
reflect
you? And yeah,
character, the characteristics
sure.
of real people very often.
Oh, I hope that answers your query, Ms. Taneja. And there is another question from Tushar Kant Palai, and he asks, what will be your message to upcoming writers, and how can they really mesmerize readers by their way of writing as you used to?
How can they?
How can they really mesmerize readers just like you
Okay.
do?
Well, I don't know, by being yourself in some ways. Oh, there are different kinds of writers. You get the subjective personal writer that I am, or maybe fantasy or adventures set in distant imaginary lands. So you write, find out what you're good at when you write. Be comfortable in your writing. Feel that you're enjoying it, and that you are comfortable with the characters and the background. Don't force yourself. I meet many kids who say they want to write an adventure story. I mean, they'll set it in America or England because they've grown up on, say, either J.K. Rowling or Enid Blyton or someone. So they want to write like that instead of writing out of their own experience or lives. So you must be original, and also um, be familiar with, have a with the background, with the place you're writing about. Otherwise you'll
So
make
true.
mistakes. Otherwise you'll
Be
make
true
mistakes.
to, I mean, be true to your strengths, and
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely, absolutely. There's another question from Vikas Singh, and this is for me. And he says, Sohini, what is your most memorable experience as RB's editor? And well, we all we both know Vikas, and he runs this very popular page called Fans of Ruskin Bond.
Because has
And
predicted all his books.
so, Vikas, I think to answer your question, I think I really have that rare privilege to read the first draft of his manuscript, and a handwritten draft. I mean, which is such a rarity today, right? I mean, a hard copy that arrives, and you really get to see it and kind of soak it all in. So I think that's for me. That for me, of course, is really really special. Apart from all the correspondence that I've had with Mr. Bond, and I was talking about it in the beginning of
Bernie
this
is
session
a
today.
great letter writer. She writes wonderful letters. And that's
You're the only one I write letters to, and thank God for that. I mean, I've kept this habit only for you. So I think that this whole exchange that we've had over the years, like hundreds of real letters, I mean, by ordinary post, I really treasure that, and I think that's what makes this equation so very special. And so, Mr. Bond, at this point, and I know we're running out of time, there is. I would like to, you to maybe read something from the book here, maybe a passage that you would like to
I
read, or
I was I think I can manage. The glasses
otherwise,
would
no
look
problem.
the
Mhm.
trouble in this. I'll write a little. I'll read a bit from this story called "To the End of the Rainbow." Shall I?
Yeah, a new
Um,
nonfiction piece that you wrote for this collection.
yes, yeah, it's a new piece. There's a hill outside Missouri called the Pepper Pot, presumably because it looks like one. And I would go there sometimes, a little over an hour's walk, just to soak up the sunshine, the smell of the grass, the clusters of the wildflowers, especially after the departure of the monsoon rains, and sometimes even write a poem or two, for I always carried my notebook with me. Opposite Pepper Pot was another hilltop, which ought rightfully to have been called Salt Cellar, but instead bore the rather mundane name Top Tibber. Tibber, of course, meaning hilltop. No one lived on these two hills, although on their lower slopes were the huts of the Gujars, who grazed their buffaloes here every summer. Before winter set in, they returned to their forest dwelling in the Schwalik Ranges. So now the huts were deserted. I was alone, not really alone, for an eagle circled overhead, and that meant a hare or ferret or some small creature was in its ambit. A small cloud passed overhead, and there were a few drops of rain. I set off down the narrow footpath, and then, to my surprise and delight, an astonishing thing happened. A brilliant rainbow appeared in the sky, forming a bridge between the two hilltops. It stood out radiant against the azure blue of the sky, its own colors appearing out of nowhere and shining brightly just for me. They say there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and you might just find it if you try hard enough. But I was after no pot of gold. I wanted all the colors of the rainbow, and I wanted to put them in my poems and stories so that when I came to the end of my days, all the colors of life would be there at the tip of my pen, and I could truly say that I had been to the end of the rainbow, and that a pepper pot was my first pot of gold.
Absolutely beautiful, Mr. Bond, and I know I can say this actually for all the readers and all your fans who have joined in. Your words and your wisdom has given so much meaning and joy to our lives, and your work has really made our life richer and more colorful. May your pen never dry. And I think that's all I can wish for. May you continue to write such amazing and phenomenal stories for us. And may you keep giving us the gift of such wonderful books. And on that note, I think it's time to wind up the show today. Thank you very, very much for joining in. Stay well and keep writing and have a great evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. Thank you.
Everyone.